Well, good evening, everyone. My name is Rashane Lonzo, and I will be your moderator this evening. First, I want to thank all of you for taking the time out on this super snowy, wintry Wednesday to spend a little time with us. So, real talk, is it really love? This is about domestic violence awareness, and February is Teen Dating Violence Month. So we will be sharing with a group of professionals that are willing to walk us through the process and have some conversation. And this is dialogue. So please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. And we want you to know that this is a collaborative effort from community partners, right? So we know that there is power in partnership. So we want to start off by thanking a few of our partners. We have Just Us Kids Childcare with the CEO and owner Tanya Sims. We have the NPHC of Lansing, the National Panhellenic Council here in Lansing, and it's a chapter of 9 Black Greek letter organizations. We have DRM International Learning Center, which is a private vocational school that I happen to know a lot about. And we also have the Selfie Factory. We have Voices of Color with our very own Tanisha Ashakur, who is our main presenter this evening. And we have Greater Lansing Area Club, which I'm also a member of, and they are the main sponsor of this event this evening. And so again, there's partner is power and partnership. And at this time, I would like to introduce Renee Freeman, who is the current president of the Greater Lansing Area Club. Renee.
Greetings. Thank you so very much, Sister Lonzo. Welcome to Real Talk. Is it really love? The Greater Lansing Area Club membership is pleased to collaborate with community partners to bring awareness to domestic violence, which is one of the many special projects of the National Association of Negro Business and Women's Clubs, Incorporated. Our mission is to promote and protect the interests of African American women, serve as a bridge for youngsters, and to improve the quality of life in our local and global communities. I wish to thank the GLAC Domestic Violence Committee members, Alicia Eccles, Sonia Sanford Quinney, Katriva Bixby, Shirley Wallace, the Greater Lansing Area Youth Club, Riley Lewis, and its VP, Stacy Lewis, and especially the chair of this event, Rashane Lonzo, for bringing us this vital discussion. So without further ado, let's see what love got to do with it when being abused physically and mentally. Let's have a real talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, President Freeman. We appreciate that. Let me open up by also saying that this is such an important event and important topic that we were able to secure a proclamation from Governor Gretchen Whitmer. So we're going to display it. It is kind of lengthy. So I think we're just going to drop the link in the chat. It is actually in the chat. And we want you to know we appreciate you joining us. And again, we want to say that this is important, and our governor thought so as well. And that's why we have the proclamation for this specific event. And at this time, I would like to introduce you to the woman of the hour. She is responsible for keeping our conversation flowing and moving along. I would like to now turn it over to Katriva Bisbee, our facilitator.
Oh, hello. Again, greetings and thank you for taking out this time. You could have been anywhere else, or maybe not, because you probably was snowed in, right? But thank you for joining us for such an important conversation. And so my goal is to make sure that we are on task. And so this is an interactive conversation. So it's not just us giving you information. You will receive that. But again, we need you to feel comfortable with making sure that you're asking questions. If you don't know, ask those questions. And so I have a couple of housekeeping rules for you. So throughout this program, you may hear a couple of terms. So you may hear DV. That is an acronym for domestic violence. You may hear the acronym BIPOC. That is for Blacks, Indigenous People of Color. So if you hear those terms, that's what we are referring to. What is Real Talk? Again, it's an interactive conversation. We will make sure that you get information about this topic, and we have professionals that will also be given information and some tips and points about that. Again, make sure that you are dropping those questions in the chat. There will be some therapists available. So this is a touchy conversation. So if you yourself may have had some issues with this, you may get triggered. May say, Katrina, well, what is the trigger? Well, we will have individuals that will talk about that specifically later. Tracy Rebb, who has been a psychologist for 14 years, and she specializes in couples and individuals and counseling them who are suffering from traumas, depression, and other mental health challenges. And she currently works for the state police, and she does presentations on self-care and how to help them navigate through some personal traumas and other experiences. So she is an individual who will be assisting in that conversation. And again, we know that domestic violence can impact your mental health. And so later on, Jennifer Contact will be assisting and having some words. And she's a 12-year employee of Community Mental Health, and she is currently serving as a prevention therapist in the Family Forwards program. She has a master's in counseling from Michigan State University and is a licensed professional counselor with the state of Michigan. Some of her experiences include home-based therapy, as well as a children's crisis service clinician. Currently, her efforts include collaborating with community partners to promote awareness and access to mental health services and to help to prevent youth suicide and just develop and implement community health and wellness initiatives. So those individuals will be available at a later time. So if you happen to get triggered, it's okay. Cut off your camera, walk away, and we will have individuals to give you more information about it later. So again, with that, we just want to get this show on the road, and we will turn it back over to Rashane Lonzo, and we will have Stacy Lewis, who's going to introduce Riley.
Okay, so at this time, we got some housekeeping under our feet, right? We know what to expect, or kind of what to expect. We know that we need to ask questions if we have questions. We know that we do have professionals available if a trigger happens, and we're going to go into that in more detail. And then we also have just our ground rules. So at this time, I would like to introduce you to Stacy Lewis, who is the president of our Greater Lansing Area Club Youth Club section. So Stacy, take it away.
Thank you so much, Rashane. As Rashane said, I'm Stacy Lewis. I am the second vice president and youth advisor for the Greater Lansing Area Club of the National Association of Negro Business and Professional Women's Clubs, Incorporated. I lead a group of youth who are involved, constant, and concerned about the problems and social ills affecting our community. If you are interested or know a young person who is interested in joining a dynamic group of young people aged 12 to 18, please let me know. Now I'd like to introduce Riley Lewis, my daughter and treasurer of the Greater Lansing Area Club. Riley is a freshman at Holt High School, where she excels in academics, sports, and club activities. Riley is taking a rigorous course of classes, including honors geometry and honors English. She is on the Holt High swim team and is a clarinet player in the marching band. When she's not studying and participating in sports, she is actively involved in the Greater Lansing Area Youth Club, Student Council, Girl Scouts, and Crosswalk Christian Youth Group. She enjoys traveling and spending time with her family and friends in her spare time. Riley will share a poem entitled Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson.
Our Deepest Fear by Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine as children do. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we're liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others.
Thank you, Riley. Can we give her 2 snaps? Can we give her some snaps? Thank you so much, Riley. We know that that's not always easy, so we appreciate you coming on and just sharing that poem. How deep, right? We ask ourselves, who am I not to be brilliant? Who am I not to be gorgeous? Who am I not to be talented? Who am I not to be fabulous, right? Who are we not to be these things? Thank you so much, Riley, for sharing that with us. And now I'm going to turn it over and give Katrina Bisbee her opportunity to shine.
Thank you, Ms. Lonzo. Man, Riley, that was awesome. Who are you not to? Listen, come on. Listen, we were created for greatness. And at this time, I am going to present our main keynote speaker for this event. Tanisha Ashakur is a JD, a native of Hollister, North Carolina. She's also a graduate of Thomas Cooley Law School with a Juris Doctorate. And she is a member of Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Tanisha is unapologetically courageous, tenacious, and transparent. You guys will definitely see some of that transparency in her presentation. Her transparency and testimony of enduring domestic violence helps awaken others about this topic. From her experience and desire to educate others about domestic violence, birthed Voices of Color. As the CEO and founder of Voices of Color, this organization gives voices to the voiceless who have been impacted by domestic violence. So at this time, please welcome Tanisha Ashakur.
Good evening, everyone. I want to thank you for having me. As they've already said, this is going to be a very open and transparent presentation. And so we're going to go ahead and get started in essence of time here tonight. And I do want you to be engaged, ask questions. No question is off the table for tonight because we don't want you to leave here without having the information. All right, let's get started. All right, we're going to first start off with what we consider a pre-test polling. A lot of times we often hear about domestic violence and teen dating violence, but do we really understand what it is and how we can go back into our communities? And so we want to be able to recognize how much information we know before receiving the knowledge. So we're going to get started. If everyone could prepare to participate in a quick polling. Just answer as honestly as you can, and then we will keep going, okay? Thank you. And the first question should be on your screen as of right now. I will read the question in essence for those who may be having trouble seeing the question. It is usually after the victim has left that the abuser may commit a homicide, suicide, or both. True or false? And then you just select the answer and hit submit. And we can go ahead and keep rolling out those questions. The next question is, most teens tell their parents about being in an abusive relationship. True or false? All right, the next question. Domestic violence is a loss of control. True or false? All right, we're going to go on to the next question. Alcohol and or drugs cause abusive behaviors. Victims stay in an abusive relationship because they do not believe they are being abused. Domestic violence only happens to people who are poor, lower class, unemployed, or uneducated. And we have a few more questions. All right, the next question should be popping up here shortly. Children who witness domestic violence in their home are more likely to become violent themselves. Women who really want to leave could easily get help from her religious leader. Thank you all for participating in the poll. Okay. So before we get started, I do want to indicate as I go throughout my presentation, you will notice primarily I will be referencing female, she, in using the terms more so because domestic violence oftentimes is more reported by women versus, oh, well, you can take it off the screen, it's okay. And with that, I just want to put a disclaimer out there that we do understand that males can be victims of domestic violence. But again, however, in this presentation, we will be referencing her and the female victims primarily because that is often what's mostly reported and who we tend to focus on. But we do understand that domestic violence does not focus on any age, race, or gender in any of those natures. So this applies to everyone. However, you will hear more so me referencing she and her. Next slide. All right, first we want to talk about some myths before we even diving into domestic violence as a whole. So what are some of the myths that may be out that's circulating about domestic violence? And the first one is domestic violence occurs only in poorly educated, minority, or dysfunctional families. A lot of times, often we do see that, or that's the stereotype that's put out in regards to domestic violence, but it also happens across every social economic status, no matter how much your financial, your wealth, your finances, your wealth, or what race or nationality you may be, it is all across the board. So that is a myth. However, that may be the case when it comes to reporting, because a lot of things are swept under the carpet depending on where you are in life or is not reported. Drinking causes battering. This has been a long-term myth that many people fall back on and say, if he's drinking, he abuses. And what we need to understand is that drinking does not cause one to abuse. Abusing is a personal choice. Again, I will say to the choice to abuse someone is a personal choice. So whether a person is drinking or becomes drunk or is an alcoholic, it is not the reason they are abusing. However, drinking may enhance those moments. However, it is not the reason they choose to abuse. Batterers can't control themselves, or they have poor impulse control. I know many of you may have probably answered that question and say, okay, they can't control themselves. But what I want you to remember is oftentimes when there is an abuser, if they are very particular when they do certain things, which means they absolutely have all the control because they are very selective when they have those behaviors. It's behind closed doors when no one's looking. A lot of times that's why we don't recognize when people around us, friends and family, have been abused, because they're not doing it in front of other people, which means they very well have control. They're choosing when and where to abuse. If a battered woman really wanted to leave, she could just call the police. We know that this is not the case oftentimes because victims tend to not trust law enforcement, especially with what's going on now in terms of the BIPOC community when it comes to law enforcement, the ability to trust law enforcement. And what does that look like for the victim? Does the victim become the defendant when they call the police? Does that jeopardize their safety when the police is called? Law enforcement tends not to know how to properly handle domestic violence calls, so that is a concern when calling the police. If a battered woman really wanted to leave, she could easily get help from her religious leader. Many of you may be Christians on this call, and so am I. I want to indicate, or whatever your religion, let me say that oftentimes abusers have used religion against their victim. They may take scripture and turn it around in a way that makes the woman in particular feel submissive in a way that she's supposed to accept certain behaviors. Also, it is well known that pastors in churches will often have the victim say, just keep praying. And oftentimes this leaves the victim in a very vulnerable position because the churches do not know how to handle domestic violence, and they often lead them down the wrong path and encourage them to stay in relationships that are not healthy. Couples counseling is recommended to support abusers in changing. I know there may be therapists, psychologists on this call who may do this. In the domestic violence industry, we do not recommend, it is not recommended that if you are in a relationship where there's a victim, survivor, and the abuser, that they receive counseling together. That is not recommended because at the end of the day, once you go into therapy or receive this counseling, the victim is still put in a very vulnerable position, not only just for she or he will not share truthfully out of fear of what will the retaliation and what will come upon leaving a counseling session, because we have to understand, again, the abuser chooses to abuse, and so therefore this is something that the abuser needs to take help be held accountable for individually, and not with the victim as if the victim needs to change something. Okay, next slide. What is domestic violence and intimate partner violence? You will hear those words used interchangeably, domestic violence and intimate partner violence, because it's so important to understand the intimate partner violence, and I will explain that in a second. It is a pattern of learned behavior. So that goes along with the myth when we talked about impulse control. It is a learned behavior in which one person uses physical, sexual, and or emotional abuse to control another person. And so, and the reason I'm referring to the domestic violence and intimate partner violence, because in the state of Michigan, under Michigan law, a person has a domestic relationship if the four applies. So if you have a spouse or former spouse, as a dating relationship or former dating relationship, there's a child in common, or the resident or former resident of the same household. I want to address the fourth one so everyone is very clear. This is one that the state of Michigan, when they created this law, a lot of prosecutors have had to address the fourth one. Resident or former resident of the same household. The conflict comes because if you're in a domestic, if you're relatives, if you call the police, they're going to call it a domestic because you are related, family, what have you, on the same roof. However, when we're referring to domestic violence and intimate partner violence, we want to be able to separate. Domestic violence is not just because it's the resident or former resident of the same house, not just because people live together. There has to be an intimate partner relationship there to make it domestic violence. And so oftentimes, I know in Ingham County, with our prosecutor in the domestic violence unit, they will not charge under domestic violence if you are just a resident or former resident of the same household and the law enforcement is called. So that is a little tricky when it comes to the Michigan law for domestic violence. Next slide. Domestic violence nationally, most of you know this information, that 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men have experienced some form of physical violence by an intimate partner. Women between the ages of 18 and 24 are most abused by an intimate partner. And when we think about those ages, we're thinking, why between the ages of 18 and 24? And one of the most important things, which is why we're here today, is because we're not educating early enough for our teens and then to understand what is a healthy relationship. We've missed that communication. And so now that these teens are able to grow up and be on their own and they get in relationships, so they are mimicking either what they have seen or what they perceive as a healthy relationship. So at the age of 18 and 24, that is the age you're most likely to experience, or where we're seeing that they're most likely to be abused. And so one of the things I do want to discuss is, we know that domestic violence happens across all ages. So even with the elderly, we are seeing abuse. And so it very much looks like, when you think about elder abuse, not keeping, they need help with certain things. All those things are not being done. A lot of times with elderly, you're seeing the financial component, the financial abuse happening with that older age. Next slide, please. So domestic violence in Michigan. And this may surprise you and it may not, but I think it is kind of interesting when we look at the dynamics of men and women. 36.1% of Michigan women and 25.8% of Michigan men experience intimate partner physical violence, intimate partner rape, and or intimate partner stalking in their lives. So oftentimes we wonder where does the man stand when it comes to domestic violence? And so we are seeing here that it is being reported, it's just not reported as much. And I think when we encounter the situations when we look at the male dynamics, really understanding, do they perceive it as domestic violence? Are they the man? Is it seen as a weakness if they're reporting the abuse? How the male ego, all these different factors come into play as to determine, are the men reporting the abuse? Because we know that women are also abusive. And so we don't want to negate that is happening in our communities and how prevalent that is. And like I said, that may be surprising to you or it may not. And one of the things while we're talking about domestic violence in the state of Michigan, I want to stress the importance of when we're talking about the system in Michigan alone. In Michigan, you either have domestic assault or aggravated domestic assault. And for a first offense in the state of Michigan, domestic violence is considered a misdemeanor. This is very alarming to many. It is considered a misdemeanor with 93 days in jail and or a fine of up to $500. So it creates another reason why the system is not trusted and when it comes to protecting survivors of domestic violence, because it takes 3 offenses before it becomes a felony. Next slide. Okay, so here everyone is probably very familiar with the power and control wheel. So what we're going to look at here is, you see there are a lot of different areas. One of the areas that is not listed on this power and control wheel, which is very familiar, coming into play now is litigation abuse. So after all the phases of the power and control wheel, and again, these could be no particular order, and some of them you may never encounter. But when we think about pets and property, I have experience where there are survivors who don't want to leave because they're afraid to leave their animal, whether it's a dog or cat, what have you, because they're afraid of what the abuser will do to the pet. And they oftentimes want to take the pet with them, so they will stay in the abusive relationship if they're residing in the same home because they have nowhere for their pet to go. And oftentimes shelters do not allow pets in the facilities. They are encouraging more shelters to begin to add that component to their shelters so that we can oftentimes get survivors out of these situations because they can bring their pets. And also we know pets can be therapeutic. Also, you will, when I want to point out, we're familiar with physical abuse, verbal and sexual abuse. I want to reference, and me sharing personal testimony, which I am very transparent, as they've already indicated to you tonight. So you will get to hear a little bit of me also in this, so you understand how real domestic violence is, not just from a textbook perspective, but reality. Because sometimes when we talk about domestic violence, we talk about domestic violence, but it's not so clear cut. So when we talk about sexual abuse, I am also a domestic violence survivor in which I was raped several times by my abuser. What does that look like? Because many people feel if I am in a relationship or if I am married, I cannot be raped by someone that I am in a relationship with. Please understand that you can absolutely be raped by someone who you're in a relationship with, whether you're married or not. And so, I did not really understand that, or I knew that, but I was not willing to say the word rape because it was someone I loved and I could not fathom that to be my reality. And so when we talk about spiritual abuse, I really, really want to hit in on this because it says putting down my faith, cutting me off from my church, or using church and faith to his advantage, soul destroying behavior using scripture against me. So if you are a part of a church or what have you, please pay attention to these things. Do not, marry or not, please do not encourage victims to stay in abusive relationships. It is never okay to be in a relationship that is abusive. Using children, we've often seen where children are abused, children are murdered in these cases. They threaten to harm or take children away, refusing to make child support payments, belittling in front of children, and using visitation as a leverage. This is a huge issue right now, even during the COVID. I have a lot of clients who right now are going back and forth with the court system. They continue to file motion after motion after motion for child support or to just keep changing the custody. And it becomes litigation abuse because they're doing that to continue to control the survivor in that situation. Because now you have to come to court. Now you have to take off work. And to be able to take off work, I want to give you those numbers. So victims in intimate partner violence lose a total of 8.0 million days of paid work each year. So for you you work in an environment or you have your own business, pay attention. When people start taking off work, whether it be for court dates or they're just not showing up, really get to know. This is why it's so important to pay attention and know the signs of domestic violence, because it exists. And so let's go to the next slide here.
Tanisha, I'm sorry. I know that you wanted this to be interactive. I have a couple questions, so I'm going to toss them out there at you, okay?
Okay, go ahead.
The first question is, how should parents respond to their child in an abusive relationship? Should they file charges against their abuser or just work with their child?
So in answering that question, I would certainly tell you if you're saying whether you should file charges, that is, first have a conversation with your child. You want to make sure that you know what you're talking about when you say this is an abusive relationship. I am going to always tell you to file charges. And I say that, but you have to be ready and prepared to protect your child and to understand the system and what's coming after. So I would suggest also, it's just not about filing charges, but it's getting the support system around the child. So finding and making sure you have a domestic violence advocate to walk everyone through that process, because what justice may look like for you is not what you're going to get from the system when you go to court. So finding out what is it that you're wanting out of the situation, and also speaking with your child, because it's so important to know their stance and where they are. But the only way you stop an abuser is to have it on record. And I say that because most of the time the abusers, by the time my abuser, I was not the first person he abused. It was just never documented. So that's why I say having a record is important, because otherwise people won't know.
Okay, thank you. Tanisha, you know what? So I have a couple other questions that are kind of coming through, and they're sending them to myself and facilitator Bisbee. The other question is there specific training for the faith-based community?
Yes, we can always train the faith-based community. It is a matter of the faith-based community being willing to be trained. If there is someone who is interested, you could please feel free to contact Voices of Color, and we can definitely get training for the faith-based community.
Wonderful. A final question that we have so far. If you are an employee, how do you inquire without being offensive to the employee? If you're an employer, how do you inquire without, crossing boundaries or being offensive?
Okay. So if you're suspecting that that is something that's happening, oftentimes a person is not going to tell you until they're ready to tell you anyway. But my biggest approach is always going to a person, if you think that that's the case, is asking them, how can I help you? And you can ask that. That is why I always say it's so important to build those relationships with your employees, because of that reason. You could also, another great way to introduce something is having a training for your employees, and maybe that being the gateway, but also pulling them in to your office and just asking. I mean, the only way you're going to know is if you're asking. I don't know what your position may be, because I think relationships was so important. So it really would depend on your relationship, but asking them, how can I help you? And not necessarily already deciding that they are in an abusive relationship. And if there's anything that you can help them with. And if they say no, you have to be okay with that, but pay attention. But until someone is ready, there's nothing else that you can do.
Tanisha, I'm sorry, this will be the last one, and then we can roll in, and then I'll save the others for later. Do you have any information about the percentage of persons returning to a violent domestic relationship after being separated for a while?
Okay, so we don't have numbers, a percentage as to how many return, but I will tell you the only thing that they put out is that victims return 7 times before they leave. So if you think about, we talk about 1 in 3, and over 20 to 40,000 in the state of Michigan in 1 year. So guaranteed they all have returned. So I returned a couple times before, and then it was until I was almost killed with a knife to my throat and strangled that I got out. So what I'm saying is, and let me explain the reason why that is the answer to that question. We're talking about returning 7 times before someone actually leaves. It's because we do not have the resources in place. Nobody wants to have this conversation, first of all. So when we're not having a conversation, when we don't have a system that we can trust to protect us, and then we're telling people, the constant thing that we always do is we want to say, you need to leave, you need to get out. And I, as a victim, would turn to you and say, and then do what? Do what? Are you going to make sure that my child has childcare? Are you going to make sure I'm still able to get to my job? Because I may have to relocate. I may have to go to a shelter. All these wraparound services are not readily available. And financial support. Right now, during COVID-19, we're seeing more victims, survivors returning to their abuses because they lack childcare and can't afford childcare. But guess what we don't have? There's not a specific daycare that's catering just to domestic violence. And so Voice of Color is working to do that now, to build a childcare just for domestic violence alone. So yeah.
Thank you. Tanisha, you know what? I said that was my last
You're okay.
question. It was. So this is my next comment. I just wanted to add that we do have Just Us Kids out of this conversation as we were planning this committee and working together. One of the things that we wanted to do when Tanisha voiced that was a concern of not having a childcare resource for someone who's in that situation, we reached out to Tanya Sims, who owns Just Us Kids, and she works with a lot. She works with the court system, but she also has like unconventional childcare hours, so 24 basically childcare hours, and she works with children and families that are experiencing domestic violence. And so I wanted to just throw that out there because we did discuss this in planning about 7 or 8 weeks ago. And since that time, we have been able to find a local community partner who is willing to work with individuals that are in that situation. So I just wanted to add that, and you could go ahead.
Great. So yeah, that is definitely a plus. And we have to understanding why the child care is needed, because oftentimes if we have a safety plan in place and there's an escape plan, to have a child that's lingering with you to be able to get out of that situation, we need a safe drop off place for the child so that the parent can do and make moves that they need to make and know that their child is safe. And also for court purposes. All right, so this is so important as it is Black History Month. And Voice of Color, I must say, being the only Black servicing provider of domestic violence, probably from here to Detroit, this is an important topic, especially in our area, the Black community. And I do want to really share this right here. And I'm going to read it verbatim because it's so important when you hear it. As due to systemic racism, racist policies and racist societal structures, both Black women and Black men experience intimate partner violence at a disproportionately high rate. Law enforcement officials often arrest Black survivors, and police, jurors, and judges are less likely to believe Black survivors than white survivors. By intentionally denying Black people access to economic opportunities, the ability to provide intergenerational wealth, healthcare, education, and a sense of safety from governmental systems, racist policies increase the prevalence of risk factors for domestic violence. These systems create numerous barriers for survivors seeking safety. What does that mean? Racist systems put Black people at greater risk of experiencing intimate partner violence. This is a reality that I deal with in Voices of Color daily. And I'm going to give you a real example. A hospital, I won't name the hospital, I had a Native American woman, which I would not have known she was Native American just by speaking to her over the phone. I was contacted by a nurse in fear of her losing her job, but she contacted me to indicate, I have a woman who's here who has been abused. She had a ruptured eardrum. She could not see. She could not walk. She had been beaten so bad. She called me because a fellow colleague of hers, which was a nurse, had made a statement that she speaks ghetto. And they were not willing to help her and provide the resources that she needed to rehabilitate and heal from these circumstances. And so, knowing that information, I was able to get in contact with her. And what they did was provided her with a one pager that had the domestic violence resources on it. And they walked away. The problem with that is she could not see, she could not walk. And when she contacted me, thank God I was able to get in contact with her, because when she reached me, she was telling me she had no other choice but to go back to him. And so, again, when we see these situations happening, and I am now collaborating with hospitals because Black and Brown people are not reporting to the hospitals, the local hospitals, unless they have been brutally beaten and have to be brought in by the ambulance. They're not going because they don't trust the systems. And another real example was I spent a Friday, Saturday, and Sunday working with a survivor. And I personally could not contact law enforcement for fear of, okay, this is a Black father. There is a son that's 2 years old in this location. How can I get her out, call the police without them harming him and causing more trauma in this family? So there are so many dynamics when we go in and deal with anyone from the BIPOC community that we have to consider. Next slide. Domestic violence plus the physical and mental impact. This is a conversation that people really don't have, and the after effect. So we talk about teen pregnancy. When it comes to teen dating violence, we often have seen, and it is very well known, that you will encounter situations where the abuser is encouraging as a control factor for the teen to become pregnant or intentionally impregnating her. Miscarriage and stillbirth, the stress or the assaults or the attacks that cause on the female. abdominal pain, and other gastrointestinal problems that a lot of times comes from stress as well. Neurological disorders. I want to reference this because after coming out of my abusive relationship, even that was in 2007. In 2016, I was diagnosed with pseudo seizure, which are non-epileptic seizures. Right? Never heard of it, didn't even know it exists. I was having almost like 20 a day. Well, most people probably are having these and they don't even realize what they are. They look very much like seizures. They feel like seizures. You're very aware. But my brain stopped communicating to me my traumas or what I was feeling, and my body reacted. And so they call those pseudo seizures. So that is something to consider. Anxiety and PTSD, very familiar. That's not uncommon. Hypertension, cancer, and cardiovascular diseases. It is so important to consider these things. And I also want to share something that's very intimate, but again, I'm a very transparent person. And the only way we get this information out is when we go through these things that we share. And so in 2019, I was also diagnosed with vaginismus. Many of you probably have never heard of, don't know what it is. I would advise you to look it up because many women on this call may be experiencing that. And so what that is because of the trauma, the rape that I have endured from my abuser, now years later, those muscles in that area they're starting to protect me. So any touch or a penetration to that area, my body rejects, and so it causes pain, and you have to go through pelvic floor therapy. And so I'm saying this because I'm in me sharing that testimony to people. A lot of other women have realized that that's what their issue is as well. Next slide.
Tanisha, I just want to just interject right here. Definitely, we appreciate you being transparent. And again, thank you for coming on to share. And you talked about domestic violence. We talk about how this can impact mental health. Both of these are conversational topics that are hard for us to have. There's taboo about different things, and it's just really difficult. But I just want to just admonish that we, especially as BIPOC community, have to talk about these things. Because we don't talk about it doesn't mean that they're not happening, and we just don't want people to suffer in silence. And since that slide talked about domestic violence and how it can impact mental health, I just wanted to segue and provide Tracy as well as Jennifer the opportunity to maybe talk about some things as it relates to mental health and domestic violence. I know Tracy will be speaking too about different triggers and things of the such, but just giving them that opportunity to chime in while we're on the topic of how it can impact your mental health.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this conversation, because it really is an important conversation. And so I want to remind folks that are on the call and are listening, if anything that's being said starts to trigger you, please take care of yourself. It's okay to turn off your camera and step away for a second. It's okay to take a moment to breathe. I teach folks something that's called box breathing or 4x4 breathing. And basically you inhale, count to 4, hold it, count to 4, and then exhale, count to 4. Do that 4 times. And what that does is it sort of signals to your body that it's okay to reduce the anxiety or to reduce what may be happening. So I encourage folks, if you find you're being triggered, because here's the thing. We've said it a couple times already. These conversations have to be had, and they have to be done transparently. They have to be done real, right? The whole conversation is called real talk. And so that's what we're doing. So I want to remind you of that. Real quickly, I just want to talk about some of the mental health implications. Miss Ashakur has been doing amazing, and I have been riveted because I've been really like, man, this is some good stuff. But I want to start by talking about this as a broader conversation about mental health in general. Mental health is a part of wellness, just like physical health is wellness, occupational health is wellness, spiritual health is wellness. So what we're talking about when we talk about domestic violence and intimate partner violence, really we're talking about a disruption to wellness. It's hard to be well if you're being physically, sexually, spiritually. Ms. Ashakur talked about litigation as an abuse. I never even thought about that, but it made total sense when she said it. So, what we're talking about is something that disrupts the victim's ability to achieve and hold on to wellness. So, you may see things like PTSD, which is post traumatic stress disorder. You might see anxiety, depression, suicidal thoughts, or even suicidal attempts. Because when somebody is hopeless and they feel like they cannot get out any other way, sometimes women and men will attempt suicide as a way of getting themselves free. Um, Chronic stress, fear, shame, an overall sense of sadness and damaged self-esteem and damage to that person's self-worth. These things, can really affect them. Even how stress is handled, right? So when we're healthy, we're doing well, we can figure out how to handle stress, right? Because my theory is if you're an adult and you're conscious, you are experiencing stress on some level, especially if you're working, right? And so, but typically when we're doing pretty good, we can say to ourselves, hey, I'm not doing too well stress wise. Let me go, take a nap, take a hot bath, go for a walk. Let me find something to do to manage this stress. Well, guess what? When somebody is in an abusive household, stress is constant. They become hyper vigilant and worried about everything that's going on, every sound. I've worked with patients who knew by the way their abuser walked in the house, they knew what kind of day it was going to be, and it was not a good day. I've worked with adults who were children who lived in abusive households. Same thing. They knew when dad walked in, they knew what kind of day it was based on how he walked in the house. Can you imagine being that vigilant? And so they would scatter. They would go hide. They would run out the back door. They would go under the bed because they could tell by, so they had to listen to that degree to know, this is not a good day, so let me go hide. So it impedes that person's ability to manage their stress and how they relate to other people. They're not very trusting because Ms. Ashakur talked about it. The system is not trustworthy at times. Maybe somebody came in to quote unquote help and made it worse, right? Because they weren't able to get some resources and things like that. Some of the things I named those are primary effects, right? So some of the secondary effects are things like drug and alcohol abuse, overeating as a way of coping. Because again, remember I talked about it's difficult to cope with stress. Having a hard time establishing healthy relationships or even recognizing what a healthy relationship is and struggling to adapt to change and adversity. And so when you see these kinds of behaviors, it was talked about earlier to pay attention, not to accuse, not to push, but to pay attention because you might be the person that can say, hey, I noticed something's going on. Is there anything I can do? Is there something I can help you with? And then lastly, just a couple ways to promote mental health wellness and to help somebody who you may know who's in this kind of relationship know the signs. Ms. Ashakur talked about that earlier. Know the signs. If it walks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Okay. Know what the signs are so that way you can assist that person. Listen without judgment, right? Because I will bet you money that person is already judging themselves, right? And remember, I talked about their shame involved in being a victim of domestic violence. Help them develop a safety plan. It may be something as simple as when you're scared, call me. That kind of thing, right? Provide resources if you can. Explore that person's strength with them. Because simply because you're a victim of domestic violence, it doesn't throw out everything else that you are. And the problem is sometimes people who are victims believe that. They believe that this is all that I am, is a victim. But remind them that they have lots of strengths as well. And then maybe encourage them to use those strengths as a way of changing the circumstance, correct? And remind them your support is always available to them. And then lastly, this is going to be a tough one, and I know it is. So I'm going to say it, and y'all take a deep breath with me. It'll be okay. Respect their choice. Miss Ash Shakur said it's 7 times, and that's a true statistic. I was going to say that same one. It takes people 7 times to leave. So if you're talking to them on their first time, their fourth time, they might not be ready yet. And it's okay to respect their choice, because you don't have to agree to respect it, but you can respect their choice and let them know that you're there, and be honest. Hey, I'm worried about you, but I'm here for you, and I'm here to listen when you're ready. So that's all mine.
Thank you, Miss Tracy. We appreciate that. That last one about respecting the choice. How many, sometimes even in friendships, you know, you tell your friend, don't do that, and you be like, ah. But
Yes.
really, like even in something major like this, and as hard as this topic is, we have to respect a choice. And so thank you for sharing.
Absolutely.
Jennifer, would you like to add or share something?
At this point, I don't know that there's much I could say that hasn't been said better by Ms. Ash Shakur and Ms. Tracy. The thing that I have to express my bottomless gratitude for every organization involved in this event, and for each and every one of the individuals, is highlighting this importance to our young folks. The younger we start to encourage these conversations, the younger we start to talk about, what do healthy relationships look like? What do relationships that may be becoming unhealthy look like? The more we foster these conversations, the more those folks are going to be there to say, as Ms. Webb just said so eloquently, I noticed this about you. I am here for you. I am here to support you. And we're having these conversations with our young folks. And that, you know, obviously I'm biased. My professional life has been spent working with our adolescents and our young children, but they're the group that gives me hope. And they're talking about mental health, and they're posting on TikTok about mental health, which baffles me. TikTok baffles me, but it gives me hope that these conversations are ongoing, that there are young folks and groups and organizations dedicated to young people who are here this evening to hear Ms. Ash Shakur speak about this incredibly important topic, who will now have information about that relationship between mental health and physical health, that we must care for our mental health and our physical health, that experiences such as intimate partner violence impact not only our physical bodies, but our mental bodies as well. And so just this information is so incredibly timely and so beautifully presented. I think the other thing that we want to ensure that young people and communities and families are aware of is that there are those resources. You know, sometimes I think it's easy for us to say things like time heals all wounds, because we want to encourage folks that, you know, patience and forbearance and learning your own personal coping skills. And what that can really do to some of our survivors is make them feel like they are alone. Well, why isn't time healing my wound? What's wrong with me? And it just heaps onto that survivor's experience. So validating and providing this education that this is trauma. This is something that can impact your brain, that can quite literally change the way we are wired as human beings. Now, that's a double-sided sword, right? That yes, trauma can change the way our brains are wired, and we must recognize that and validate the experiences of our survivors. But it also means that with caring and with therapy from a practitioner who is educated in this particular type of experience, that person can then work to rewire their brain. It will take time and patience, and more than simply saying time heals all wounds. This is work and effort and survivorship. And I think sometimes those of us in helping professions want to paint everything in puppies and rainbows and sunshine. And unfortunately, this is deep and difficult work, but we have to respect our survivors. We have to elevate their voices. And again, it's been said more eloquently than I could. So respect their voices.
You have, look, I got my tissue. Yes, like say that. And so, and then the whole epigenetic, they're not even ready for that discussion. So thank you, Tracy, and thank you, Jennifer, for just even, getting in there and giving us those tidbits as it relate to, mental health. And, we can't be healthy. You hear you hear phrases say that, your wealth is your health, and knowing that your health encompass uh, a variety of things, and it's just not physical health. So this is just so good. Like, I'm just so full. This is so good. And so,
Katrina, I'm sorry. Let me just chime in for 1 second because I
no
don't want to
problem.
miss these opportunities to engage
Yes.
our phenomenal guests. So we had one comment that we encounter distrust in the educational setting as well. Sadly, teachers and other staff members can't identify the symptoms of trauma and other issues that are manifested in the students and their parents. As a result, CPS referrals are made based on bias and judgments, causing a larger chasm of between families and schools. And then I also wanted to add, since we had Tracy and Jennifer talk about that mental health component, we did have a question that came in that it said, the question is, how does domestic violence affect children in those early stages of development? So if Tracy or Jennifer want to chime in on that.
And just also add for everyone to know that we will have someone share later on in this program about their experience as well, as being a child involved. And so that person will probably be able to, lend some insight as well. And also just a quick plug for mental health resources. NAMI Lansing is available here. I happen to be a part of that organization. And so it's a grassroots program. They have support groups for veterans. They even have a faith-based initiative. There are things, that peer support groups, and it's really, really, really great. We actually have our vice president or our president and some other members on this evening. But these is definitely some individuals or organization that you can reach out to. And Lonzo, I just want to talk about the statement about the things in school. Well, NAMI does ending the silence presentation where they go into the schools and let them know about the warning signs. There was a presentation that I had the opportunity to hear, and after our students were presented with that, some students were able to come and say, hey, I know a friend who are exactly doing this right now. And we've had in some of our district, unfortunately, individuals who have committed suicide. And just here recently, we've also saw that the Miss USA, that issue. And so because we talk about it, I think again, some of the state school officials think because we talk about it, we encourage it. That's not, we talk about mental health, we talk about sex, we talk about suicide. We're not encouraging it. We are actually giving people the resource to be able to know and recognize so then that they can better make decisions and choices when they get into those situations. And so I just wanted to share that as well.
Let me first start by saying I affirm everything you just said, Katriva. You cannot make somebody suicidal by asking the question. And so that's from a clinical perspective. You cannot make somebody suicidal by asking. Actually, it does the exact opposite in a way. It helps them to know that you care about them and that you're interested in their well-being. But trust me when I tell you, you don't make somebody suicidal by asking, hey, are you feeling suicidal, right? Or by discussing it. The question was about children. Just real quickly, one of the things that we can look at is what's called adverse childhood experiences. They're called ACEs. And the more ACEs a person has, the worse off it is for them. And ACEs could be things like homelessness, living with somebody who's a physical abuser or emotional abuser, a parent that's in prison, having food, not having enough food and neglect and things like that. So when somebody lives in a household where there is physical abuse, usually there's psychological and emotional abuse in there as well. It can cause some of the same issues, anxiety, depression, PTSD. Some of those children without intervention will grow up and sometimes be abusers themselves. They'll grow up and have drug and alcohol issues, simply because they're trying to manage the trauma. So think a lot of times when we say PTSD, people think war, right? They'll think a soldier that's been in war and they've seen people be blown up and things like that. The same thing happens when you live in an abusive household for the children and the woman woman or man that's being abused. And so it does a lot of damage to that person's mental health. And so the hope is some intervention comes along to begin to help that. And that's kind of what Jennifer talked about earlier, is that you can begin to reverse that damage. Hopefully that answers the question.
Thank you.
That's great. All right. All right. I think we're going to continue on with our presentation. And there is a link for ACEs. Rashane and myself actually took the test. And so, again, like how Ms. Tracy said, with these things, they have indicators, but with support and different things, those can help be reversed. And so we are definitely excited to know that information. And so,
are you able to drop that in the chat for them, the ACEs? It was very interesting, and I think it's enlightening for us to be able to see what that is actually, because those experiences happen when we're children. So by the time we take the test, all of these experiences have already happened. So when Katrina convinced me to take the test, I was a little disappointed that my score was so high, because I did not think that I was that traumatized as a child, but apparently somebody's test does. And so it was just informative for me to see that, and then to again know that a lot of those experiences are like when you're a child, they start at age 4 or 5. So if we're having these conversations earlier and having them with our younger generations and our children and our children's children, then I think it helps a lot, because then we can identify those things that might be going awry and then get the support systems that we need in place. So their numbers aren't as high as mine. I think the highest was a 10 and I got a 9. And so, I'm hoping that my kids, theirs are a 1. So I think take the test and take some time and just to have that information, because it was very enlightening and insightful.
Thank you. Jennifer dropped that in the chat. And let's not making some things normal. And, since we're talking about the BIPOC community, one of the things that Lonzo and I have talked about is some of those things we've made to be normal, right? Operating with high anxiety, having all these things on our plate. And even as African-American women, right? I read an article today that we're known as the superhero, but it's okay to be like, I don't got it all, I don't know it all, or I'm tired. But we have just, through the years have carried a lot. And for some, then you have the magic, black magic, like, yeah, but it's like, help, time out, flag on the play, I need some help. And so, again, it's okay with not being okay. And we will definitely have some resources and things for you as well. And so at this time, go ahead. No, go ahead.
I'm sorry. The therapist and what you just said, can I just hit in on a couple of things really quick, just a personal testimony, guys? Because for anybody who's experienced domestic violence, even if you're here today and you're experiencing it, I want to say that I went through a period where I became suicidal after receiving therapy, after having been in therapy. And let me explain, because I had been so used to feeling pain that when I no longer had it, I was yearning for it. And I know that sounds crazy to a lot of people, but I need you to understand that is very real. There's nothing crazy about it. It is just the fact it became our norm. And now we were talking about rewiring our brains because of that. And I became suicidal because I didn't have that anymore. And I couldn't figure out what to do with myself, because my life, it was like surrounded around manipulation. And so even when he was not out at work or whatever, I was so busy learning his manipulative ways to defeat him. So I always was trying to stay one step ahead. And so your brain is constantly on overload. And so what did that do for me? I became the best manipulator because I had to learn all of his skills to perfect and to stay alive, right? So I need you to understand that it doesn't make you a bad person. Now, what I will tell you, when you get out of the situation, if you're out of the situation, you have to now, as we talked about going through therapy, rewiring again, because I will tell you now, most of you probably know my husband, and we've always said this, I became abusive. So I need you to understand, you can go from victim to abuser very quickly if you don't. And I say I became abusive. I was roaring at my husband when we were married, when we first got married, because I did not want what had happened to me to happen to me again. And so I had to continue to seek therapy to be a better me. And so one of the things I want to also talk about really quick is, we talked about victim to abuser, but victim to defendant. Hard, because, and this is where I say, don't let people get you caught up into the whole idea of self-defense, you guys. I have a client right now who shot her abuser, and is behind bars right now fighting for her life. She has 4 young children. And so there's not a system, because at the end of the day, and Katrina said, and this is the reason why I want to hone into this, you talked about being the superhero. When Black and brown women show up in the court system, we are expected to hold our heads up high. We are expected, we have a certain strength about us. So when we claim self-defense, it's not seen the same. So being a superhero in court, it doesn't work, because when we show up unraveled, and I'm Tracy and Jennifer, I'm sure you know this too. When we show up in court and we're all unraveled, then we have split personalities. We getting diagnosed with personality disorders. We're bipolar. No, we've been abused. I have so many clients that have been misdiagnosed because when they showed up, they were just unraveled. So, and how does that tie in? We talk about CPS. Our children are being put in systems because the system does not understand that, no, we cannot just up and leave because you have nowhere for my children to go. And for me to protect my child is better. I wrote an article one time that said, I would rather be beaten 5 more nights than to leave one night and be killed. And people didn't understand what I meant by that. Had I had children, it would have said the same thing, because you know why? Our lives are on the line. And so a lot of times our children get put in the system because they say the mother was not trying to protect her child to stay in an abusive relationship. And I'm telling everyone on this line, on this call, you don't know until you've been in it. So don't judge a mother trying to figure out how she's going to get her and her children out of a situation. I'm done. I'm going to let y'all go ahead and proceed.
Good. Woo. All right. So we'll keep it going, and we'll have moments for questions, and put those in the chat. And at this time, I want to introduce Corey S. Clay Jr. We got to make sure we let y'all know he's Junior. He's locally known as CJ, and he is a 2021 graduate of Waverly High School and a Lansing native. And Corey spends his time serving families as an employee at a local funeral home, as well as serving youth in our community through his local congregation as a licensed youth minister. Please welcome Corey as he shares his experience and perseverance as it relates to domestic violence. Thank you, Corey.
Good evening, everyone, and I'm glad that the invitation was extended me to come and have a few moments to share. Growing up, I was growing up in an abusive household with my father abusing my mother. And, at times it was hard dealing with that type of thing, not necessarily understanding it. There were many times where I did get involved myself in relates to getting my father off of my mother, or hearing or seeing things that to me were uncalled for at that moment, and in any moment in time, because it's to my understanding that, of course, no man should put his hands on a woman, everyone's heard that saying before, but no man should emotionally, spiritually, any physical abuse. All of these things capture in as abuse. I think you had that wheel up a few minutes ago that showed up all of the different forms and ways that people do use abuse. And there should be no form of abuse, a man on a woman or a woman on a man. And so one of these things that is very important that we take the time out to have a discussion about this, and to avoid falling into these, I guess, actions or ways to express yourself. Because as they say, if you don't learn history, history will repeat itself. If you don't make something aware, you'll never really see that it's there. And some people see that it's there, and instead of addressing it, they'll just put it under the rug. But the rug can only cover up so much to where it starts raising and piling up to where people can still see the junk. And so I'm glad that this conversation is being held today, and that I'm glad that there are people who are able and willing to share their experiences, share what they've gone through. And so I'm glad that I was invited today. As I forestated, that I did grow up in a household. It was kind of rough and rocky. I still can remember some things, can still remember hearing some things, seeing some things. And you know, as it was stated, I am a minister. I was licensed at 14 years old, so I've been preaching since about 6 or 7. And so going to church every Sunday morning, and my father played the piano, and then my mother sang and all of that. But you see these things and you understand, okay, there's this church side, but then there's the at-home side. And one thing, I guess it would be kind of hard, but I do want to talk to everyone as a whole, but those who are a part of the Christian faith, we can't just avoid the conversation because we don't want to have the conversation. We have to, any pastors, any leaders in the church, we have to be aware of things that are going on with our congregants. If we're supposed to be shepherding the people in the Christian faith, you have to know what's going on with your sheep, and you have to take care and tend to your sheep properly. And so we as the church, we can't just avoid certain conversations because we don't want them to be had. And so it is very important to receive proper and efficient training to make sure you're tending to certain situations properly. As it was said, you can just say pray about it and all of these things, but there has to be another option that you can give your people to seek help. Yes, you can pray and read that, but you still need to go get counseling and therapy. You still need to encourage that if therapy, you need therapy, you can have your spiritual side, but if you need to be on medication, it is okay to go get on medication to help assist you. Because, it's said many of times that Jesus is the doctor. He is the doctor of all doctors and all that. Okay, yes, but he has earthly doctors to tend to our earthly needs. And so it is okay for you to go get on depression medication if it's needed. It is okay. After a large incident that we had, I myself had to get on depressive medication, I think for about maybe a year and a half. And then I just made up kind of in my mind. I realized that I didn't necessarily need the pill to help make me happy, because when I got on it, that was kind of the initial reaction, is that the pill was going to assist me in being happy. But then sooner or later, I realized that the pill, it was a great assistant and helped me get to where I needed to be until I was able to get in a better state. It is okay to get on medication. It is okay to seek therapy. It is okay to go get help outside of just the church and your pastor and your friends and your family. It is okay. I went to therapy and I've gone, and then after a minute I kind of weaned off and stopped going, but then I went back to therapy, and I've always enjoyed the therapist that I did have, and my mom will tell you, interestingly enough, when I first went, I kind of tried to fake sleep on the couch to not go into the meeting because I didn't want to go into therapy. So that was pretty funny. Now looking into it and looking back, I didn't want to go into something that I now love to go and attend to. So it's very, very vital to your mental health to be able to get through this. One of the things that I was dealing with, and I talked with my therapist about it, he said it's some cognitive thing that stems in your brain that you're not physically in that moment, but your brain sends off a signal and that notifies you and takes you back to that moment. And that stems and starts creating a circumstance, and you start maybe getting anxiety, and it can stem a panic attack and all of that. But the more that you begin to work on that, it's important to work on your mental health after growing up in an abusive household or experiencing abuse yourself, because the mental health will help you with your physical health. And after you tackle your mental health, then everything else falls into line. And so that's some of the experiences that I found helpful for me during my time growing up.
All righty. Well, thank you, CJ, for sharing that and just echoing how it's definitely a collaborative effort, and that if we need help, we can encompass all of that. We can encompass, some spiritual counsel. We can encompass the going to the therapist, and as well as medication if it's needed. Just because you use these outside things does not mean that you are not in faith, right? We need to use some wisdom and be balanced as well. So thank you for sharing. We have a lot in the chat that's just saying thank you for your experiences, that this program has been really great. And again, it is always our goals to collaborate with organizations and to bring you information. Most of the organizations that we're part of, our whole goal is to help forward and empower our community. And so, it may be a part two to this because there's other things that stem out of this, right? And so make sure that you guys stay tuned to what GLAC has, and our website and our Facebook and our Instagram. For those of you guys are on social media, we definitely will drop those tags in the chat to make sure that you stay abreast of what is going on. And we will continue on with our program.
Okay. Thank you, CJ, so much for sharing. I certainly know that we probably will have questions at the end for you, as people probably more intrigued about your testimony. So now we're going to kind of segue into talking about teen dating violence. As again, it's so important to understand that when we talk about domestic violence, it's a huge topic. It can go in so many different directions, but just to reiterate, February is Teen Dating Violence Awareness Month. And so we do want to talk about teen dating violence again when we talk about that age of 18 to 24 experiencing intimate partner violence. This is important for us to have this conversation. And so when we look at the numbers, 82% of parents reported feeling confident in their ability to recognize abuse signs, but only 42% could accurately identify signs of abuse. We can think of several reasons why this may be the case. I think oftentimes we as adults think we know it all. We think we figured it out. And I think it's key for us to understand teen dating violence from a new generational perspective. We are now in the times of technology. And so maybe we're not computer savvy or tech savvy as we've gotten older. Or we always associate things with our children. And I know I am guilty of it. I have done it with my 3 children, of associating what my teen years look like to what their teen years were, to determine this is what they're going to do, or this is what they're going to experience, versus having the conversation. And so I think it's important when you look at this to say, yeah, it's like 82%, but only half of us know what we're talking about. Okay, only half know, you know what you're talking about. So we have to continue to educate ourselves with the new generations as well. Next slide. And so nearly 20.9% of female high school students and 13.4% of male high school students report being physically or sexually abused by a dating partner. Only 33% of teenage dating abuse victims ever told anyone about it. So I will reference, I don't know if most of you are familiar with Grit, Glam, and Guts, which is an all-girls conference held in the Lansing every year, except for when we've had COVID. Well, anyway, during that time, I was allotted opportunity to be a facilitator. And one of the experiences that I had was having a conversation about teen dating violence. And I always think it's important to ask teens, before we even begin to educate teens, to ask them, what does dating violence, what does domestic violence look like to them? And then we start having the conversation, because I think now that opens up for them to feel like they have a space in the conversation and they have a voice. And in that conversation, I think this is what led to why there's a lack of reporting as well, because I had a young lady out as I was sharing my testimony. Everybody's sitting around laughing as a group of teens. And then a young lady actually stood up, and what she indicated was, when you think about a teen, and sometimes they date older, sometimes they date their age. And a lot of times parents, we don't know who our kids are dating if we're really honest. We don't know who their friends are. We don't know who they're dating. And we're probably not even paying attention half the time. And so what ends up happening is they are learning from the outside world instead of from home. And I begin to indicate to teens, be careful what you're saying as well, because if I'm going to use Katriva, I'm going to use you as an example. Me and Katriva are teenagers, and I can only imagine, I'm just going to put this all on Katriva, like I don't know what she would be doing. And she, for instance, I'm out here just talking about, I will never, ever be in a domestic violence relationship. I wish he would, all these different things that we probably all said. She's listening to me. I'm her friend. She's listening to me say all of these things. And I'm probably saying, oh, that girl is stupid if she go through that. She's stupid. She's stupid. She's hearing this. And Katriva very well may be the friend that is going through that abuse or teen dating violence. Now, Katriva is never going to tell me, as her closest friend, I may be the only person she had. Now she's never going to tell me, because I have now provided, or now she knows my perspective. So she's not going to come and talk to me. So as teens, having the education and being aware of what we're saying, even as teenagers, because our friends may be the only person we have to go to. If we already saw the statistics about teens are not going to their parents. So you may be the person that they want to come to. So being careful and understanding and not being judgmental, even at a teen perspective. Next slide. All right, so also one of the things I wanted to get into is we oftentimes talk about red flags in relationships, right? But we never have a conversation about the yellow flags or the green flags. But we tell the world about, this is what you need to watch out for. Watch out, watch out, watch out. And what that has done for a lot of people is it has created a fear. And so the minute someone has a bad day, oh boy, that's a red flag. He's abusive, she's abusive. Not to say that that may not be the case, but I think it's important that we understand yellow and green flags so that we know how to look for a healthy relationship. And also that we don't create a fear within as we begin to process people or to try to figure them out. So one of the things when we look at, I'm actually going to start with some green flags instead of jumping to the red flags. When we look at green flags, we're talking about people that, in terms of relationships that you trust. There's that open communication and respect for one another, honesty, loyalty, the ability to compromise. You're not just always giving up something or feeling like you're always sacrificing for someone. There's a level of comfort there. You feel safe and secure. And you see that there are similar goals and interests. And I think that is so important because as you begin to grow and develop relationships, and even if you become intimate with someone, we've often seen times where if someone, especially when you're looking at success in relationships, husband and wives, you begin to see jealousy, you begin to see different levels where one is not pushing the other or one is jealousy. And then you really start seeing those red flags and the yellow flags. and I think this is key because sometimes I think some things fall in this area when you start looking at personality differences. When you look at someone, you may want to examine who you're dating. If you're dating someone and you realize, you know what, we just have different personalities, and that's okay. It doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing, or it may not be the best situation for you to be in if your personalities are so different, and you're struggling with communication. Is that something that can be fixed? And is it, I always tell people to consider never make someone a project. That's how I got into an abusive relationship. I made someone a project, thought I could just change this person, get them to help them get to where they were going, and just we would be okay. You worry about you. You should not be making someone a project. So struggling to communicate and your interests are different. This does not mean that this is a bad situation. It's something to pay attention to, but it doesn't make it like, it's a bad, these are red flags. And we all probably know the red flags because we often only hear about red flags. Those controlling behaviors, jealousy, gaslighting. Gaslighting is so huge. And sometimes we don't even recognize it. Ridiculing, hypersensitivity, verbal and sexual abuse, manipulation, mockery, uncontrolled anger. All of those things are red flags in which we probably have, everyone on this Zoom tonight have experienced red flags in relationships. And whether we ignore them and continue to see them, I know even after my abuse relationship, once I ended up, when I got married, I was looking at my husband side-eyed, like, I don't know, only because I have seen so many red flags that everything was red for me. So be careful and just know what it looks like to have a healthy relationship too, so that you're not living in fear about dating. Next slide. All right. We want to talk about why women stay. Again, this does not negate that their men are also abused, and also negating that there is the LGBTQ community, LGBTQ plus community that is in this area as well. And when as I'm talking about the LGBTQ plus community, I want to iterate with the population it is often, in terms of being outed. Also, when it comes to shelters are not set up to address or to house transgender. And oftentimes we run into situations where I'm gonna say it's a safety issue, or it runs into being a safety issue with transgender because it's a female shelter and you say you identify as male, then you're a male in that facility, or vice versa. And so it ends up being safety issues, and all the shelters don't have policies in place to address it, or different wings to handle that issue. So there's a huge issue when it comes to the LGBTQIA plus community. But when we talk about why women stay, the most significant, the lack of resources and social support. Getting those resources, qualifying for resources. As we know, when you're in the middle class, if you're lower class, you can often sometimes get government assistance. Upper class, maybe no. Middle class, so you run into problems with being able to get resources as well, and the wraparound services, as we talked about, like with childcare and love. She will love her abuser and remember the good times in the relationship. This is so true. And many people say, why? I can tell you all the times that I was abused, those were horrific moments. And you hear what I said? Horrific moments. Because there were good times, there were great times. And you always try to identify with the good and the great to downplay those bad times. And people say that's not love, and I say it is love. I love this person. Now, whether they love me back the way I love them, it doesn't negate that I love them. And so when someone tells you they love their abuser, don't judge that, because they do. They love the person, they don't love the action. Okay. And hope, she may hope that her partner's promise to stop are real and that the relationship will return to the way it once was before the violence began. There's always hope. You know, we live in a world, and especially, you know, if you grew up in the church, you learned about hope, you love about forgiveness and all these things. And this is one of the things we continue to hold on to, that hope that one day something will change. If, you know, for me, it was like, if I help him get a job, I help him become the person that he said he wanted to be, he will be different. They don't change. They're not going to change until they're willing to change. The shame, we talked about that. I know the therapist spoke on that, the shame of relationships. How everybody, if you would have saw me years ago, 2007, I was still a very strong, confident person working in the court system. No one knew I was going through. So I can't even say it was shame, but you don't necessarily see it on a person. The isolation. I wasn't, you are not around family and friends as much. You find yourself being at home, and it happens. So it's very subtle. So I need you to understand all these phases of abuse are not necessarily drastic where you notice them. And so many people, I even ask myself, how did I get here? And they can be very subtle approaches. For me, now hindsight, being able to look back, I'm able to say the first thing that I remember him saying to me that was I would say the verbal part, was him saying I was the biggest girl he had ever been with. At the time, I didn't realize how that spoke to me. Years later, now I can say that was the beginning. So practical problems in leaving, there's a lack of shelter space. Short stays in shelter where space is limited, lack of legal assistance. When we talk about legal assistance, okay, I went to law school. I've tried to work with a lot of attorneys after I graduated to discuss domestic violence. There are not a lot of attorneys who understand domestic violence. And I am telling you that from someone who is in that legal field. There are not a lot of attorneys who understand domestic violence and can represent you in that component. I think it's so important. I always am careful about sending anyone an attorney. I don't care if they're a divorce attorney. I don't care if they've done PPOs before for something else. If they do not understand domestic violence, I would not recommend them as an attorney if you're in a domestic violence situation. If you're trying to get a divorce where domestic violence was involved, I would still tell you, get a divorce attorney who handles domestic violence, not just a divorce attorney, because they will have you in mediation, and mediation does not work with the victim and a survivor. Housing, employment, childcare, all the things the police and the court support we've all talked about. Just making sure that people, and I've said this with therapists plenty of times, not just saying any therapist or any counselor, make sure that they're trauma informed. There is a difference. Most people who believe, are religious, spiritual people, they try to find a Christian counselor. There's nothing wrong with that, but just make sure they're trauma informed. It is a difference, you guys. Fear of retaliation from the abuser. Most battered women are murdered while attempting to flee from their abusers that at any other time. That is a true fact, that most tend to be murdered when they're trying to leave. Not when they're in it, but when they're trying to leave. And I don't know if most people know that, and that's why we always say get out. But if we don't have a safety plan in place that's going to guarantee them that, then they stay until that's right. And that could take time. So I know it may be hard for someone looking on the outside, looking in, to say, what am I supposed to do? How I need to get this person out. He's going to kill it. And more than likely, he's just going to, and I don't want to say continue to abuse, but that's what he or she will continue to do. But it's that I can endure. I know what that looks like. But when I leave, if I'm murdered, the trauma that it will, and the toll that we will place on family and friends in addition to. So just keep that in mind. Okay, next slide. Talk about helping a friend. I know we all may have our definition of what helping someone looks like, but these are key. Do not judge. Do not judge. Understand what the person is saying. It doesn't matter what you think. And as a matter of fact, even when I didn't care what you thought because you weren't in my shoes and you didn't understand. And you don't say you can sympathize. We don't want sympathy. We just need you to listen and understand this is what we're dealing with right now. We possibly didn't even ask you for your opinion. We just maybe needed you to know what was happening. Be supportive. And again, not telling, in Voices of Color, I never tell, when someone calls me, I never have told a person you need to leave, you need to get out. Because they already know that. I don't need to tell them what they already know. I need to just know how can I help where they are. Because I have to understand what's going on and the reasons why. So being supportive. Next slide. Repeated violence, abuse, or assault are not her fault. Don't victim blame. We often victim blame. We say she must want to be abused because she stays. And we talk about them behind their back. Support her right to make her own decision. I know she talked about that earlier about supporting her decision. If she decides or he decides they want to stay in that abusive relationship, know that they have their reasons that you don't quite understand because you don't live it day in and day out. You can only see from the outside in, and you only know what she or he has been willing to tell you. So if I was to go to, say, my friend Katrina and say, hey, I was in an abusive relationship, I might tell her that he called me stupid one day, but do you think that I was honestly telling her he was raping me every night? No. So they support her right to make her own decision and educate yourself and protect the person's privacy. So if they have come to you, don't go to everybody else to spread that because you don't know what danger you're also putting them in or jeopardizing them. And who's very close and who may say something. Okay, next slide. All right, and we're in a virtual world now with COVID, and we probably know this will continue to be the way for a long time, even after COVID. And so one of the things, there's an organization in Canada that actually came up with a signal for help. The social isolation measures necessitated by COVID-19 pandemic are making it more difficult for those who are in a risk of abuse or violence to safely reach out for help. So I remember when and I was all for COVID-19 to stay home, stay safe, in terms of COVID. I soon quickly realized in doing this work that stay home, stay safe was not safe for victims because that meant being home with their abusers day in and day out. And nobody was thinking about them. And so here is the signal, which you see is just closing. And I don't know if everybody wants to kind of practice this. You may see it on a Zoom one day, so make sure you know it. It's closing here, your thumb, and then just closing over your thumb. That is your signal for help if you're ever on a Zoom call or doing any virtual event or meeting. Okay, and definitely want to share that with others, even if you're, we talked about for your employees and things like that, that may be something. So another key thing is this doesn't have to be your signal for help. Pick a real life signal. Give, something that you and someone else can communicate, something that is very simple, that's real. Like as you see, it's examples up here. If you see my porch light on, please come over and check on me. Use coded language. If your message asking to borrow my slow cooker, I'll follow up, yes, no questions to help you. So a prime example of, so just really quick, what was happening, I had a situation where I had to do that with the survivor. So just come up with something as of that nature, okay? Next slide. All right, and now after all of that education, we're now at the part where we're going to do a post test. And we're going to move through this. So once it pops up on the screen, we're just going to keep those questions as true and false. So this is reiterating to see how much you guys have learned. We can go ahead and get started and just keep them circulating.
And this slide here is to resources. So you have a variety of resources, and we can email this slide out to everyone so that you can have this and have something to refer back to. Again, it is our duty to make sure that our community is healthy and has access. And so I know there's been conversations with different organizations just about that whole access to resources and healthcare and mental health and things of the such. And so as those come along or we add those things, we'll make sure that we have a running list, but we will send out what we do have based on the things that we talked about on this evening to make sure that you guys have it to refer people or in the event, again, that you may need it.
Thank you so much, Katriva. And
Welcome.
before we do our final thank you, we did get a couple questions concerning males that may be interested in contacting Voices of Color. So Tanisha, if you could please so kindly drop your information and contact information in the chat. We did get a couple inquiries about males attending your services and if there was a fee for your services and learning more about what you do. So those came through privately. If you could drop it in the chat, and then we can also make sure that we send that registration, that list of what your information on it and the resources to the attendees. So our Wednesday night has come to an end, and we just want to thank you so much for taking out time in your day to learn about this very sensitive yet pertinent conversation and topic. We need to have more real talks like this so that we are dispelling the myths, and we have professionals like Tanisha that come on board and are transparent. Like, I can see all the way through. I can see your ribs because you were so transparent, Tanisha, and that's what we need, okay? We need for people to be real with us about what's happening, especially in our communities. We have to have these tough conversations, and we just want to just send a great big thank you to all of our partners. There is power in partnership, and that's what made this happen. Again, GLAC is the main sponsor of this event, but we were able to pull this off with over 60 people in attendance this evening at the High, with partners like Just Us Childcare, who offers 24-hour childcare, who's worked with Haven House, that's a 5-star childcare center in the state of Michigan. NPHC of Lansing sharing the event and having a lot of our Greek orgs come on and support us. Hey, I'm actually the current president of the NPHC of Lansing. So thank y'all for representing tonight. And then DRM International Learning Center, myself and Mr. Lonzo, we actually own that private vocational school here in Lansing. 20 years this year, y'all. So something big happening. Also, a shout out to the Selfie Factory. And last but definitely not least, one of our most important guests of honor, Tanisha Ashakur with Voices of Color. Thank you all so much. Please complete the evaluation so we have feedback and we know how to roll for next year and as we move forward and plan more events. And all have a blessed night.